everybody thumbs up that we're all happy and recording, which is good. And as usual, the recording will be available on the website later on this afternoon for Pension Playpen. Let me just invite Nicola in. And good morning, Nicola. If you could mute, please, that would be great. Thanks very much indeed. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining this week's session. Delighted to have on Dr. Arun Muralidhar, all the way from, you think he's in the States, but actually he's not. He's in Tulip Land at the moment, in Holland. So without any further ado, what I'll do is I'll introduce Dr. Muralidhar. If you don't know him, I'm sure he'll do a brief introduction as to who he is. And then Henry will help with some questions, and so will I. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. Thanks very much for joining. And Arun, over to you.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Henry. Just 2 minutes of introduction. I used to issue bonds for the World Bank back in 1992. I got moved to the pension fund to help manage the pension fund in 1995. It was a defined benefit plan, but we had all sorts of reforms because the World Bank was telling the world that they needed to privatize Social Security. So I've seen one iteration of reforms already. I wrote a book with Franco Modigliani, the Nobel laureate, that the World Bank was going to make a disaster of retirement by privatizing Social Security. We were correct, but nobody listened to us. I run my own investment business. I have a fintech business. I teach for fun, but I got sucked back into the pension reform issue because Kathleen Kennedy, the older sister of our current, I think, health minister, came to me about 10 years ago and said, 50% of Americans don't have a pension system. And, most of them are either self-employed or earning small amounts of money. In trying to design a solution for them, I basically found a solution even for my own defined contribution plans, which are a terrible mess, even though I manage pension money for a living. And I came up with this idea of what we call the selfies bond, and we can talk about it during the discussion. Fortunately, Brazil issued it 2 years ago, and so now I am on a mission to try to see that it gets implemented elsewhere. Full disclosure, I make no money from the innovation, so this is purely pro bono. In fact, I lose money. I don't make enough money from my travels to pay for what I do. So I'll leave it with that. Henry, do you want to sort of take it from there? Does that give enough of an introduction?
It does. But we're interested not in what you're doing in Amsterdam or New York or New Orleans or wherever in the world you are, Singapore. We're interested in the UK because we're very parochial. And my understanding is that you've recently been to see Andy Tarrant, who has been advising the pensions minister on this bill of ours. And I wondered what you actually spoke with him about and whether you got anything you can share with us.
So actually, thanks to you, Henry, I got interested in UK pensions, even though I worked for JP Morgan Asset Management on St. James Street many, many years ago. And actually, my boss is Dame Harriet Baldwin, who's now an MP. And after reading all your posts, I started to get more interested in the UK because, interestingly enough, what I'm learning more and more, and I'm by no means an expert on UK pensions, is I think the UK has probably the best starting conditions to design probably one of the best pension systems as we move from DB to DC. And why do I say that? Because A, you have a pensions minister, which the US doesn't have. I don't think the Netherlands has one either. I don't think Australia has a pensions minister. You have an organization like DWP, very sort of clearly dedicated to pensions. You have the pension regulator, TPR, and you even have the Pensions Policy Institute, which is a think tank, which is nonprofit and not biased. So I had to come to London to give a speech at some academic conference, and the folks at DWP very kindly were interested to hear what this selfies idea was all about, because as you remember, Pensions Playpen hosted me last December, and we had a 3-hour sort of roundtable with folks like David Fairs, Steve, and then, Guy Opperman was very kindly the host. And basically, I was just sharing with DWP essentially what the Brazilian experience has been. So for folks who are not familiar with selfies, if you don't mind, I'll take a step back, which was as I was trying to figure out how do we think about creating effective DC plans. As all of you know, getting a good pension is a very complex sort of formula of compounding, investing, rebalancing, and then decumulation. And the math behind that is probably is beyond the skills of 99% of the population, because you've got accumulation, decumulation, compounding, and inflation. And like I said, I manage DB assets for a living. I've made my clients lots of money. My own DC pension plan is a disaster. And it's a disaster because all the theory in finance about managing assets is wrong. It's about preserving wealth. Whereas, as Henry sort of, repeatedly points out on LinkedIn especially, it's about pensions. It's not about a pot, right? And as I got into this area, Professor Bob Merton had been writing for probably more than 10 years that we need to make sure that we define retirement as ensuring people can keep their pre-retirement lifestyle through death, ideally, right? From retirement through death. And if you draw a picture of that, it's nothing more than a series of real cash flows. And that's when a light bulb went off in my head that if that's all it is, why doesn't somebody issue an instrument that pays me those cash flows? Because there is an annuity puzzle, right? Ostensibly, an annuity gives you those cash flows, but nobody seems to buy them. And in fact, my advisor, Franco Modigliani, coins the term the annuity puzzle when he gets his Nobel Prize in 1985. So the idea was, why don't we create a bond? And I'm going to call it SELFIES because it stands for Standard of Living Indexed. And that's very critical because I'll come back to the word standard of living repeatedly. Standard of Living Indexed forward starting income only securities. So the nature of the instrument is it pays you nothing till you get to retirement. Let's assume that's 65. And then it pays you 10 quid a year real for 20 years, which is the average life expectancy in the UK.
Yeah, we call this deferred annuity, yeah, without any longevity.
Exactly. It's nothing more than a term annuity in a bond. Why in a bond? Because then you have potentially a very natural issuer, which is the government, because they issue long-term debt and they're trying to finance infrastructure, etc. Standard of living is a tweak where rather than just indexing to inflation, which then leads to a decline in real standard of living in retirement, Professor Merton, I think all the way back to 1983, said pensions should be standard of living indexed. So in an ideal version, let's say the UK bond is linked to a VAT index, and we can go into that in more detail. And I think my only creative element of it was to say, make the coupon 10 quid real per year. Why? Because then if your average Uber driver or the person who looks after your lawn has a target of 50,000 quid a year over what they get from the social security system, then divide 50,000 by 10, 10 quid a year from each bond. And your goal is make sure you buy 5,000 bonds before you retire, right? So I wanted to dumb down the math to basically something that, even my dumb sort of 20-year-old kids can do as well, right? And so that was the innovation. The innovation wasn't really putting the bond into this, as you call it, it's basically a term annuity in a bond. I think the real innovation was changing the coupon structure to be a simple number, which makes the division feasible for everybody. And Brazil has issued this. It's available on your app. It asks you two questions. What's your target date of retirement and how much money do you have to spend? And you press a button and instantaneously you actually can buy it. But you can also buy this in slices as small as 1 quid at a time. So you're buying fractions of the bond, which then allows for financial inclusion. It's liquid. You change your mind, you can sell it. The prices are quoted 3 times a day, and it's a two-way price. Right now, it's only focused on the retail market, but there's no reason why there couldn't be an institutional version of it. And so, Andrew Tarrant and Rob O'Carroll, who kindly had organized the meeting, asked very relevant questions. And I think their aha moment was that this could be a perfect solution for self-employed people, because self-employed is a large segment of the population. You've got 4.4 million, I think, in the UK self-employed, don't always get covered by the various schemes that you have, including Nest. And so you could have, an offering like this as a starter project in a group that's not being currently served. So it was a very fun, exciting meeting. They liked all these innovations that sort of Brazil had pioneered. In fact, in Brazil now you can even buy slices of retirement income on gift cards to be able to gift to your employees or friends, right? So it starts to change this whole dynamic of disconnecting the individual pension from the employer, and now just kind of having it float on a technology platform that could live off an app that just about everybody on the street has, right? So I'm very encouraged by the meeting because the questions were perfect. The suggestion that it could have an application at a point which is not being applied was perfect. So
That's good.
Aaron,
Aaron, we have a hand raised by Chris Giles. Chris, do you just want to unmute Chris and ask your question?
Yes, thanks, Stephen. I think, as you know, Aaron, I'm broadly supportive of the concept, but as far as the UK goes, and my main issue is that the history of volatility of 60-year bonds versus 20 or 30-year bonds. And it's not long ago, in fact, it's the 12 months broadly from November 21 to November 22, when a 50-year index-linked gilt lost 85% of its value.
Yeah.
And that's, I can see for young people, it's on their phone. It might say the income's the same, the income's going up or something a bit. They bought a few more, but then when they see the actual value of the bond, and they suddenly think, well, shouldn't I have bought that this week, not last week, or this year, not last year?
Yeah. So Chris, you hit the nail on the head, which is the problem is we've all been trained incorrectly by all these Nobel Prize winning economists, right? Wealth is meaningless, right? Wealth only has value for a goal that I have. So the wealth that I have in my fund for my retirement is very different from the wealth I have for my children's education, right? And so because we've been trained very poorly for 70, 80 years now, to think wealth is the metric and volatility of wealth is the risk factor, it's going to take a little bit of unlearning before this will be successful. So our recommendation to the Brazilians was don't quote anywhere on the app what the price is because it's irrelevant. Once I've bought it and I've locked up the cash flow, whether it's the bond market that fluctuates or the stock market, which, as my president has done, he's tweaked the markets a couple of times already. And people in America were freaking out when their 401ks became, 201ks, right? But if you had bought these bonds, the people in Brazil had no change in retirement lifestyle. And I think that's the message you have to convey in a pensions dashboard is what is the retirement lifestyle we're going to be able to finance? Forget about wealth, right? So I take your point, but I think at some point we have to do the right thing, not the wrong thing for the wrong reason, right? And so showing people the volatility of the bond. And in fact, one of the journalists who's been very supportive wrote an article because the price of the Brazilian bonds had declined. And sure, there's always going to be regret or fear of missing out. You can't stop people from their behavioral biases. But if you can show them very clearly, by the way, your goal was 50,000, you've got 30,000, right? Already locked in. You got to either save more, take more equity risk, and that's what the government is trying to do, and we can talk about it, or you got to postpone retirement or lower your ambition, right? There are very simple 4 metrics that you can communicate to people, which has nothing to do with the market volatility. And I think that's where, in fact, Martin Wolf had an article in today's Financial Times, which I like a lot, but it misses the fundamental point. Pensions are about making sure we have secure retirement income, right? That protects our lifestyle. Let's make the dashboard all about that, right? Let's not give them stupid statistics. Sorry?
It is all about that. I mean, what's displayed on the pension dashboard is your S&P calculated future income, not your wealth.
Right.
And we've just had a pensions bill which talks about default funds, basically leading you to income and not to wealth. So that's the default now. Income, not wealth. So you must be happy. And I think you'll find Mr. Tarrant had a very big part to play in that.
And that, to me, is exactly where we should be going about this, right? Now, the problem you have is if you say you have to report income, but then you don't have a market price for income, and this is the problem we have in America. They passed this bill called Secure 2.0. If every vendor can make up their own sort of definition of what your target wealth is and how it's calculated, then it's a mishmash. The beauty of a selfies bond is it's one price for everybody who retires on that one day to convert their assets into guaranteed income. So having the bond creates a pure market price, no subsidies, no sort of funny business in this instrument, so that any asset that I have can potentially be converted into an income equivalent on this dashboard. The problem I have in America is when I get my defined contribution system, there's about 2 pages of what every instrument did in terms of its return and its volatility, which is completely irrelevant information. So we have to stop sending people nonsense, to Chris's point, which only confuses them to make the wrong decision, which is sell at the bottom of the market and, try to buy at the top. Just tell them, listen, stick on the simple path to adding more and more income over time, and you'll get to your goal. So, Chris, there is a behavioral aspect that I can't control, but I don't think that's a reason to not issue the instrument, right? It's a reason to try to educate people to think about the right goal in the right way. And one of the reasons I'm teaching finance at a university is I don't allow the students to buy a textbook because these textbooks are wrong, right? These Nobel Prizes have been built on a completely fallacious starting assumption. And that's why you're asking me the question you're asking, right?
You still got your hand up, Chris.
Yeah,
Do you want to ask me the question?
Just quick follow-up? I mean, the one reason, I think you'll be aware of this, Henry, and some of my followers on LinkedIn, after the autumn budget, I published an article, the UK government has a source of funds to boost capital spending, and I came up effectively with a 30-year selfie.
Yeah.
Right. So it was not looking for people to put regular contributions in. It was looking at people with modest and inadequate pots 10 years before retirement who would welcome an opportunity to lock in a certain return from, if they were 55, from 65, backed by the government. So effectively a treasury form of stock. And the reason I particularly drawing attention to that period at the moment is we know the UK government want to utilize pension fund monies to help public finances. And there's a classic situation here. A lot of people with inadequate, modest sized pots, and that might be not the sort of small pots of £1,000, although it could be, but it could be anything up to 10, 20, 30,000 pounds. And if somebody can lock in, and I gave the example, essentially you can make a 10% return in the sense that if you've got £10,000 at a 5% return with a 3% escalation post-retirement, you can guarantee at age 55, you will get £1,000 escalating from age 65, backed by HM Treasury. And that's, I think, the market that the government ought to look at alongside your longer term plan.
So I would actually come back to you on one point, Chris, which is if you add more coupons, you're raising the price. So what we've done in Brazil is you've got bonds that start in 2035, bonds that start in 2040, start in 45, all the way out to 2065. So what you're trying to do can actually be created for the people with moderate pots by a little bit of financial engineering. I think you have to make it 20 years to cover average life expectancy, because what happens is for the poor and minority populations, their longevity is less than the average of the economy. So this bond strips out the longevity piece, and it's inheritable as well. The moment you add 30 years, the price goes up. So why push out the maturity to 30 when the average longevity is, less than 20?
Sorry, there seems to be some confusion. When I said 30 years, it was 30 years with 10 years deferral. So what it is, it's locking in your 20-year term from 65 to 85, but it's locking it in at age 55.
Correct. So again, what I would argue is keep it simple. Don't add all these complicated deferral pieces to a bond. Just make it very simple so the average Joe on the street, and that's where you can start at that level, because if you have all these uncovered people who don't get a pension, they're going to have to be bailed out. And if they're going to have to be bailed out, it's coming from taxes, which is from all of you, right? The government really has no money. It's a pass-through. So why do you want to create a situation where you make a complicated instrument that people can't understand? I was just going for the most basic, simple structure. On this, some insurance company may come up and create a variation of what you're suggesting, which has the life piece added to it, right? Why keep it 30? Why not make it life, right? 20 plus life.
Okay, can we draw a line under this one, Chris, because
Yeah.
I can see it going on all morning.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question to you, which drags us on to the whole furore which the world is in about Mansion House and so on. Do you see your selfies as being linked to a certain type of investment? Do you see the government publishing and saying, look, all this money we've got in on our selfies, this is where it's going, this is what it's doing, or is it an anonymous investment?
No, actually, so the issue I have with the Mansion House Accord is multifold, right? One is, in a defined contribution system, the individual is bearing the risk, which means that if somebody then mandates an asset allocation or requires it or encourages it and gets a signature on a piece of paper, who bears the risk if it turns out to be crap, right? To use a sort of technical term. And the problem is the individual. So if the government starts to tell people you should put 10% of your funds in private assets or in equities or UK equities, etc., and it goes to pot, they should be at the back end saying, okay, guess what? If that happens, I'll come and bail you out guaranteed, right? I think if you go to DC, individual choice, guided choice, leave it up to the vendors, have good regulations, don't get involved in what the asset allocation should look like, let the industry figure it out. Now, it's funny, I just did a little bit of research, but the Mansion House was, I guess the architect was, I think Charles Elder, or the Eighth or whatever, some famous, dancer. His name was, I think, Dancer the Eighth or whatever. All of these people are going to sign the accord because it has no teeth, right? They've got to make these investments by 2030. Your next election has to be by August 15, 2029. And we've seen guys like Larry Fink at BlackRock do the full 180 on, ESG and net zero and DEI when the next sort of politician came into power, right? So to sign this is kind of meaningless. It was a nice PR sort of opportunity. But I think it misses the point, which is let's first get to what is the goal of pensions, which is let's make sure people have a decent, dignified retirement pension, as you keep pointing out, right? How the sausage is made should be delegated to the private industry. And so I see selfies being combined with equities and with all other assets by the vendors. In fact, I'm mentoring a young lady in Brazil to do exactly that. But it shouldn't be the mandate of the pension system to ensure economic growth and foster an equity culture. That's not the job. Now, if the government wants to invest in long-term infrastructure, I just did a quick calculation off the seat of my pants. Issuing these selfies to the self-employed in a very moderate sort of structure could raise 200 billion to 500 billion quid easily, which just puts the 50 billion that the Mansion House Accord mentions in sort of, perspective, right?
Do you think there's any advantage, Arun, right, in people understanding that what they're doing with their money has some kind of societal good? Is that too liberal of me or not?
So I don't disagree with you, Henry. And I think what will happen is if you tell people, by the way, if all you bought was Chris's instrument or Arun's instrument, you're going to have to save 15% of your salary. If you're willing to gamble a little bit and play with these other risky assets, there's a potential that it could come down to 10%, but there's also a chance that you miss your target retirement.
I wasn't saying people take risk. I'm saying that people would like to know if their money is being sent down to the government, but the government is doing something with that money which makes for a better society, whether you're talking about ESG or whether you're talking about infrastructure or whether you're talking about building, I don't know, nice rivers we can swim in by sorting out Thames water or whatever. Is there an advantage in actually linking all this funding to good projects?
So absolutely. In fact, what I would argue is because now the government is able to borrow for such a long-term window, you can actually invest in stuff which was previously hard to finance because, not a lot of people, want to invest that long-term. And in fact, Jessica Pule, who's a very bright head of the DMO as well, so one more incredible sort of institution and leader as well, brought up an interesting point in an article, I think in the Financial Times, that the loss of the DB pensions meant there was going to be less demand for long-term instruments in the UK, right? The gilts market would take a bit of a hit. So I sent her a note saying, by the way, Jessica, it's not lost, it's just flipped to the DC side. And now you can introduce instruments that'll take you to even further maturities, right? So I personally think that this can allow governments to do the kind of positive projects that you're talking about, as opposed to beating up on pension systems saying you use those monies to do the work that we want to get done. Have them own it. In fact, I even wanted the IMF to come and be the monitor for countries to make sure they don't overissue, that then they end up, doing wasteful things as well, right? So I believe very genuinely that, governments can do good. They should do good. And hopefully there'll be institutions that pop up along the way that hold the governments accountable. So in fact, when I talked to a gentleman, very senior politician in Korea, he wanted to ring fence these assets that came out of selfies to make sure that, exactly to your point, that the rate of return earned on them was commensurate with what was being promised in the bond instrument as well.
Nest are doing this a lot at the moment. They're busy telling people like me, I'm a Nest investor, where their money's going. And if they manage to get through to me that I'm actually doing a good job, I might actually stick around with Nest because I quite like the idea of my money doing some good, as well as paying me a decent amount. So I'm really sorry, Chris Cole. Chris Evans, sorry.
Chris Evans, yeah. Chris had his hand raised.
Yeah. And now it's down, but do you want to speak, Chris, or have I spoiled your pitch?
Sorry, it was just going back actually to just a bit point of clarification on the selfies actually, Aaron. So sorry for winding back. I just couldn't remember. Are they strip instruments, or do they repay a sort of a principal after the 20 years?
No principal, all coupons, right? Because
right.
The assumption is that I just want a steady stream of income. Again, it's a very blunt assumption, but the more complex you make the instrument, the trickier it is to sort of explain and price. So literally nothing more than 10 quid a year for 20 years, right? Fine. Super simple, nothing fancy. Then, the City of London folks can blend it and make it more complex and do other things. But the base instrument, we want it to be so simple that the average Joe on the street could buy it. And implicitly, by buying one selfie, you're buying a micro pension, but you're buying in a bizarre way what I would call an individual DB, right? That's all it is.
No, I get it. And so, but they just have to understand that after 20 years,
yeah, exactly,
that's gone.
Right. Read the FCA's Financial Lives 2024 to understand what people actually want, and you'll be surprised at how simple people want things. Yeah. This is why I'm turning towards what Aaron's doing, but I'm also very interested in what people like Nest are doing, because they're doing what Aaron's talking about with longevity built in. I like both models.
So Henry, my only challenge with Nest, right, is Nest today doesn't guarantee you a real retirement income, right? And the way Nest expresses their investment,
if they get their way,
exactly. I hope they do.
A shared ambition scheme which pays a guaranteed income plus a bit of CDC on the top. Yeah.
The beauty of this bond is Nest should be buying it in bulk, right? In a way, instead of buying complex infrastructure in Australia, Nest should be buying this for about 60% of its portfolio to lock in the CDC component that you want guaranteed, right? This should be the base for every Nest holder, on top of which they can say, well, if your ambition is greater than the basic, we'll put you in an equity fund, or we'll put you in private assets, or whatever they have. But then you educate the people that, by the way, once you go out of this instrument, there's a good chance that you may get nothing more than the base, right? That's a zero probability.
The self-employed can invest in Nest. You can sign up for a Nest if you're self-employed. Nobody does. The take-up is appalling, because they haven't got the marketing right. Why not go into Arun Muralidhar's products, as an alternative? Because at least you understand what the hell's going on. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically, right? It's just sell it to them on their phone. They don't have to call up anybody at Nest. They don't have to make 100 calls to set it up and make sure the structure is correct. It's just simple, right? Gift card your staff. In fact, this lady that I'm mentoring, her father owns a small liquor store in a very poor part of the country. And he gifted his 4 employees in the liquor store, these initial retirement bonds. And what they found is once these people are hooked into the system, they tend to buy more after that. So you don't even need to force auto enrollment and auto escalation. People, I think, Henry, you had a beautiful post once about the postal banks, right? When we were kids, that's where we had our little postal books.
Really?
This now becomes your retirement postal book, right?
Well, I know I was speaking to Andrew Young. A lot of people on this call know Andrew this morning. Sadly, he can't be here, so his apologies. And he was asking the questions which I've been asking, so I'm not doing anything clever. I'm doing what he wanted. And he said his mum invested in these things, and he could remember that she taught him about saving because she did it. And she said, when you grow up, you're going to do this.
Yes.
And there's an awful lot of people out there like me, you know, his first experience of saving were these postal books, which were fab back in the 60s, early 60s. I remember doing them from about 64, 65. I got my first one. Yeah. Because my mum did them for me.
Exactly.
And you know, this is not me being all kind of the world could be like this. It's me saying the world was like this. Yeah. And somewhere along the line, we forgot just how simple people want things to be.
No, and that, as I said, Henry, I've been writing about pensions for 30 years. I've managed assets. I've made a lot of money when the market blew up in 2008. You know, all the good things that I can brag about to my clients. But the fact that my own defined contribution is a mess tells you how complicated we've made it, right? And it doesn't need to be that way. And I think to my earlier comment to Chris is the finance literature took us off in such a wrong direction that the whole industry built products, to Chris Evans's question. We don't need this stupid stub payment at the end of our sort of 20 years, unless there's a requirement for that 20-year cash flow to be a big principal repayment. If I'm saving for my kids' education, I don't need anything till they're 18. And then I need it for a 4 or 3 or a 5-year education. Brazil created a bond for education too, because the platform allows them to do that once and for all, right? So in fact, Sally Swate at NSNI is aware of this innovation. And I think, interestingly enough, could be a great distribution channel to take this into more rural parts of the UK and not just, folks in the city of London like us who are more pension experts, right? And to see where that would fly with the more sort of small town communities, villages, etc., that, where people reside and don't have a good way to think about this.
Well, it's
Sorry,
quite
Steve.
nice now. We've got a pensions minister who's part DWP, part Treasury, so maybe you'll get there. I can see a hand up. It's Steve Goddard's got a hand up. Steve, do you want to say what you've got to say, or is there some point?
Yeah, no, I was just, it was a sort of a throwaway comment, but I've had 2 hearts already, so it's obviously an interesting comment. Thanks, Jim, and thank you, Bobby. But looking at the math, Aaron, looking at the math, if you got 4.4 million self-employed and they get a £5 gift card from Nest, that's only costing 25 million quid, isn't it? Or have I got the maths wrong? So 25 million doesn't sound a lot to promote.
5 times 14.
Yeah.
There's 14 million.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But anyway, the number in context sounds bloody small. So wouldn't if you gave every self-employed an app for a Nest then, and you said here's a £5 gift voucher, they all go happy days. Thank you very much. That would work, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And the beauty of this system is, and I think, Steve, you kindly had provided me with this information, is when you put 100 into Nest, I believe only 98.2 gets invested because that's the repayment of this £1 billion loan or whatever. In this instrument, there's no haircut at all, right? Why does there need to be a haircut for, this incredible sort of infrastructure and cost overhang when you could give people a base guaranteed retirement income? And to your point, Henry, maybe there'll be competition from Nest to provide alternative retirement solutions at much lower cost by combining a passive, index with selfies and nothing more than that of a little app as well, right? Now, somebody asked the question, what currency is the Brazilian bond denominated in Brazilian real, right? So, but to Chris's point, I think currently it's yielding something like 7 or 8% real. Which is a spectacular deal. In fact, I want to become a Brazilian citizen just so I can buy these bonds. But for me, the interest is not the real yield per se. It's the guaranteed cash flows for now. Because once you get people thinking about yield, then you start to get more complicated about the decision making. For the average person, it should just be put 10 quid in every month or every quarter or whatever, and then just build it up. or for the self-employed, when it comes to the end of the year and you know how your finances are, you can either put some in or sell some out because you didn't, sort of save enough, or you don't have the money to survive because you've done your finances, right? So David Fares has actually helped me think about this quite intelligently. So, if I make comments that seem like they're mine, I've got to give him a bit of credit on those as well.
No, don't give him any credit. He's on the call. Might ask a question. Come on, David.
Yeah. But I think Steve makes a good point. To get the whole system going, you could just give everybody a starter £5 card and say, that's it, right?
That's a wonderful idea. And thank you very much. And thanks too for the idea which we've had coming from Bob Compton. Bob, do you want to ask that in person, or do you want me to ask it for you?
Well, all it was picking up on one of the comments earlier about naming it and giving an idea to people buying these bonds what they're going to be used for. So it's your thoughts, Henry. So what I was saying, in days gone by, a long time ago, when the government needed to raise money for the First World War, they issued war bonds. They weren't actually issuing real returns, but it described what it was for, and people would buy them, even though they knew they weren't going to get much for it. So why not call them pension bonds, or if it's going to be invested in water structure being improved, call it water bonds, or call it infrastructure bonds. So if you give the bonds a name which describes what it's going to be used for, then people might actually be like a charity bond. They might be more inclined to buy it. But Aaron, I think your idea of providing a very simple solution, providing an annuity effectively for 20 years for ordinary people, certainly for those with small nest type pots, is brilliant. I think it should be taken up. And it's an easy source of income for the government to find money for current needs, basically.
Exactly. So Bob, you raised two really good points. And to the naming of it, I came up with selfies to be cute and to create a dialogue. And the Brazilians promptly dropped it when they created their bond. Their bond is actually called Renda Mais, which literally translates to retirement income extra. And the feature that they have is it actually pays on the exact same date as you get your Social Security payment into the same account, if I'm not even mistaken, right? So they're doing exactly what you said, which is let's behaviorally get people to buy this as, a top up to what you're going to get. It's a supplemental piece to what you may get from a defined benefit scheme.
That is so interesting that when you listen to Martin Lewis talking about state pension, about 3 out of 4 questions are, how can I pay more into this state pension because I've got a little behind, or whatever it is. People love state pensions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a way, people complain that, this is like this is like the government, providing a state pension. But at the end of the day, if people retire poor, the government's going to bail them out anyhow, right? There's no government that's going to turn away poor retirees on the street because those are the voters who are going to kick them out in the next election. So we know it's a contingent liability. And so, Bob, to your comment, making it a micro pension so that the average person on the street, in fact, I was talking to people at the World Bank, and they found that even in the welfare programs where they give ladies in Africa maybe £10 a month or £10 a week, they actually end up saving 1 or 2 of them, right? And so now the question is, can we connect that 1 or 2 back into a savings vehicle, either for the child's education or for the child's, or for my retirement? So there are a lot of sort of interesting ideas that come out of it. But to a point that I've kind of pushed aside a little bit is this bond doesn't favor women because women have average longevity longer than men. Typically, they have discontinuity of service, right? Because they may have children or look after older parents. And so one of the things Brazil is doing is actually, I would call it, paying for women to have children so that we reverse the fertility problem that we're having globally. In fact, I think the UN just issued a report this morning on the massive decline in fertility. We're going to have to pay women to have children and not take a haircut in their retirements for, having been out of the workforce for a year or whatever it is. So that's the part where I still don't have enough innovation to cover their excess longevity, unless you can have like a facility with an insurance company or something like that, right? So the women challenge is still out there. And if anybody has good ideas, I'm all ears, because I think I haven't solved that problem sufficiently well.
So the government could do it. The insurance companies can keep out of this. Then
We've
they put
we
them-
got a hand from Chris.
Yeah,
Chris?
I know it's Chris's hand. He's had 2 questions already. Yeah.
Oh well,
I had another
he's
question.
participating,
first.
Henry.
I
Well, you
know,
go first,
I
Henry.
know he is. But I want to know before we go on, what are you doing about tax? You don't get any tax relief on contributions. You get the thing rolling up, that's fine in deferment, and then you got the income. Are generally these things in Brazil tax-free to people, or is there higher rate taxpayers or basic rate taxpayers, they pay tax on it?
Superb question. Right now, they've kept it as a standalone instrument, which is outside of the retirement system, in which case it's taxed like any other government instrument. What they try to do to encourage people to hold it for a longer term is there's a custody fee, which declines for the longer that you hold it. And if you hold it to the first payment date, then it goes to 0. Now, the next iteration is what would be the appropriate tax treatment, and people are probably familiar with, should it be exempt, taxed, should it be taxed, exempt. I'm not the expert on the tax sort of treatment of this. I think it'll be country specific. And when I was in Ireland last week, I was talking to Andrew Nugent at the Pensions Authority, and he brought this question up. And I think more than likely the intelligent version would be taxed in the contribution, exempt, or, that's probably where I would go personally. But I think each country will have to figure out what's the most appropriate tax treatment for them, right? I don't think there's one standard answer in the design. But
I'm bringing in Chris here because he's on a splendid run. What have you got to say, Chris? Go on.
Sorry, right, got the mic working. On the question of people with small pots approaching retirement, I mean, I'm doing a lot of work on people who are getting close to retirement. I'm also conscious this issue about the government and government finances, etc. It occurs to me the easy thing to do as a starter here is to persuade the government to effectively allocate a certain amount of existing gilt issues effectively as retail issues and to split them into their component parts, because essentially every standard gilt is a 0 coupon bond which can either be used as a low risk investment up to retirement or as a longevity payment, and then the annuity income bond can be used to pay you during retirement.
Absolutely. In fact, what I would do is I would literally open up a swap window, because currently if you hold gilts in your DC account, whether they're short dated or long dated or inflation linked, as Bob Merton has showed, like I said, 10 years ago, that's an incredibly risky instrument to hold your retirement assets in because of the massive cash flow mismatch, which, Chris Evans also asked about. So I would just open a swap window and say, if you have a DC plan in which you have traditional gilts, on day one, you can swap all of that out into this new instrument at a market price. That would be, to your comment, a simple first step to get this off the rack, because you're now lowering the risk of retirement security of the entire country, which actually does contribute to economic growth, Henry. Because now, once I know that I have stability of retirement income, I might be more willing to take equity risk. In fact, the stupidest thing that we have in America is that the default product, what's called QDIA, Qualified Default Investment Alternative, is this stupid target date fund, as they call it, which changes your mix between stocks and bonds as you age 1 year. And as my undergraduate students basically figured out, all it does is it makes your retirement outcome a function of when your parents had sex. Literally, that's all it is, right? It's a completely random outcome, which has no intelligence at all. And today I have to offer it to my small staff, because if I don't, they can sue me for not having provided them with a good product. But I know that I'm offering a product which is complete nonsense, right? With this instrument, now the regulator can say, by the way, how much of the average income in the UK are you guaranteeing your individuals for however much they've saved? And now you can regulate based on guaranteed income, not on a naive asset allocation, which has nothing to do with the outcome, right? So your regulations can be much more sort of intelligent, because now the regulation can be guaranteed income based on how many selfies have been locked up and held, right? So the dynamic changes completely from stupid products, which is just earning asset managers a lot of fees, with individuals bearing all the risk, and employers basically handing off the risk because the Department of Labor made a stupid decision, to a regulated system where we can actually base it on ensuring people get good retirements, right? So I think you can transform the industry dramatically once you have some element of this. But the first starter, like you said, your starter comment of if you've got any kind of bonds today in your defined contribution, we'll give you a one-to-one swap immediately. And it solves Jessica's problem of the preferred habitat of DBs not buying long-term gilts, right? I think that's a brilliant idea.
There's a nice comment in our chat from Peter Cameron Brown saying that he's still holding NS&I exempt tax exempt savings certificates. Now, we have a history of paying tax-free income with these things, which is quite a nice one to pick up on. Thanks, Peter. I don't know if you want to jump in. You're right. Okay, and John, I haven't got a clue what you're talking about here.
I think I do. So, John, let me take this back. So obviously it hasn't been tested through, hyperinflationary environments, which is the Weimar Republic.
Oh, that's what you mean by Weimar, right?
Well, okay. Weimar Republic. And so, but the benefit of this is the design in Brazil was linked to the inflation index because they had a history of hyperinflation and had taken a long time to build up a inflation-linked government bond market. So they said, let's not get too cute on what we index it to. What I would argue is, given that your gilt market is very well established, the government should actually link it to a value-added tax index, okay? Because they're collecting their taxes.
You mentioned this, the VAT index. That's what you said at the beginning. What's that mean? I was going to ask you.
So what will happen is you can create an index based on the value-added tax receipts of the government, which is measuring not only inflation, but also changes in standard of living, right? So we'll create an index, and I've been working with some people on it, but I'm happy to see if this group can come up with a simple idea. And you calculate kind of a per capita individual index. So as the receipts keep increasing, your bond is linked to that index as well. So you get not only the inflation component of the basket of goods people are buying, but also any enhancements and improvements. If they're buying electric vehicles, etc., the basket is changing. And so the good news is then the government is hedged. So to John's point, it actually improves the government's finances so that if you do have a hyperinflationary environment, their tax receipts will go up, but then their payments will also be matched, right? So that's kind of how in the design, if you created a value-added tax, which is really linked directly to the receipts of the government, and therefore the payments, and you can solve the retirement problem, that could be the way to do it, right?
So this is inflation index.
It's a bit more than inflation. It's a bit more than inflation index because the basket composition and the quality of life is also embedded in the VAT basket of goods that you buy, right? If you only do inflation indexed and the whole sort of country changes their lifestyle, then you as a retiree are going to be worse off because you only got the inflation component. You didn't get the real standard of living enhancements, right? So Elspeth and Jim like the idea.
I love this. I'm thinking about this whole business of trying to work out whether we're getting value for money on what we're buying. Yeah. Because we got this VFM thing in pensions big time. It might start creeping into decumulation as well. And this VAT index sounds to me a beautiful aspiration for a pension scheme to be more than just pure inflation, standard of living, aspiration, whatever. That's in your VAT index, yeah?
Exactly. So again, Jim has a comment that, VAT is regressive because it taxes the poor people disproportionately relative to rich people. Professor Merton had in his original paper a per capita consumption index. The problem with those is they're hard to calculate, and then the economists keep changing sort of the statistics. But yeah, I'm not wedded to VAT, but as long as there's some element of the standard of living component that could be captured, and that's why I would love for this group to throw out some ideas and flesh out a better version than just pure inflation indexation. But John also had a follow-up question, which is how does this differ from a deferred annuity? Defer spelled D-I-F-F-E-R. So John, what I was trying to do was take retirement and break it up into two components. One is an income component, which is the 90% problem. And that's why the selfies only pay for 20 years. And then after that, the hope is one of two things. One is that now insurance companies have long-term inflation indexed instruments by which they can hedge themselves. And they could go out and say, by the way, bring your 10 quid a year selfies to me. And if I'm sufficiently diversified, I'll promise you 9.5 for life, because they don't know whether I'm going to die young or Henry's going to die young. So if they're sufficiently diversified, and now you're basically going to be able to bid your selfies with all the insurance companies for the deferred life component based on the haircut they give you relative to the 10, right? So that was the hope, was that the deferred life component came from private industry, who would now have better instruments to hedge themselves. I've also created another bond that comes after selfies finish, and I call it live bonds, longevity indexed variable expiration bonds. And maybe if I have the time, I'll try to either post it in the link or I'll share it with Steve and Henry after the call. But the whole idea was this would make sure that you hedge not just expected longevity, but per cohort actual longevity, because that's the risk the insurance company bears. So the benefit is, once you create this beast in the middle, the longevity one is less of a risk. Well, it's a bigger risk for people like us who are relatively wealthy and have the likelihood of living long. But you can cover the bulk of the people in the population with the selfies design, whether it's 20 years or 22 years, whatever the number is. And then leave the longevity piece to private industry, and then create additional instruments to help them be successful. The whole idea is not to remove private industry, but to allow private industry to create better products, right? I'm an asset manager by living as well, right? So I don't want to be disintermediated by my own innovation. So, but yeah, just look for the longevity indexed variable expiration bond idea, and that'll give you a sense of what I was trying to do there as well.
Yeah, some interesting comments in there from Gareth and Jim about the impacts of VAT on the poor. Jim's comment, VAT is a very regressive tax. It has to be paid more by the poor. Surely it'll make more sense to link it to income tax, as that product is to replace income.
Like I said, it'll take somebody with that's, I think, a bit out of my pay grade to do.
Yeah, right, okay.
Oh, is Aaron gone?
Oh, we lost Aaron.
Yeah, we lost Aaron.
He's been cut off by the Dutch government.
What Dutch government?
Yeah, it's not a good time to be a Dutch government. Well, he managed to last 54 minutes, which is not bad for an inflammatory economist. But you know, I think we can possibly give everyone 4 spare minutes if he doesn't come back. Has anyone got a question or a statement they want to make without Aaron being in the room?
I mean, Con's on the call and he hasn't asked a question yet, which is quite.
He's put some stuff in the board that it was pretty derisive.
Yeah.
Do you want to expand on this stuff about VAT that you've been writing, Mr. Keating, or Elspeth, as I now call you? Nah, you see, he's just hiding behind his.
There he is. He's back.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Henry. I'm in a cafe which is incredibly noisy, so I won't say anything now. So I'll drop you a line tomorrow. As
I would love to. You know, I tend to write these things up, guys.
Very poor idea. Jim Woodlinghead has one of the most important problems with it, which is the regressive nature of the VAT
which is Jim's point,
based measure. But I'll switch off because it's just too noisy to
Thanks, Con.
respond.
Okay.
Added to which, I've also broken my headphones this morning. So it's all complicated.
It's all going wrong.
Well,
okay, we've got Aaron back. We've got Aaron back.
Yeah, I think Microsoft decided to kick me out for the stupid comments I've made. So
yeah, absolutely, you were banned by social media.
But to be quite honest, I think the best part of this chat has been, these ideas from various members of the group, Henry, and I think that's, if we can get more of these little sessions where each one of these good ideas is sort of stitched together, it seems like the government is very receptive to good ideas. They realize they've got a challenge. But like I said, I'm genuinely convinced that the UK has all the sort of perfect pieces to put together a brilliant plan, because the Australian superannuation plan is not super and is not annuated, right? So it's completely insane that that's the model that they refer to wanting to copy for long-term investments. No, let's build a better mousetrap because you have the better starting conditions relative to Australia in my mind, right?
Okay. Chris, you want to come in with another question this time? I'll catch you first time round.
Thanks, Henry. So, Aaron, I'm obviously heard the disparaging comments that you made about target date fund strategies, but do you envisage there's a role for blending the glide path approach with buying the selfies? So if you like, using the selfies to replace the de-risking that you might do in a traditional glide path.
Yes, so in fact, I've written a paper, and I'll just try to post it in the link with my colleague from the World Bank, where we actually call it glides, but what we call glides is goals-based lifetime income dynamic strategy, right? So the strategy should not be just this arbitrary mix, but it should be relative to a target income level. And so I'm totally in favor of mixing stocks and bonds, but with selfies rather than regular bonds. Or if you have regular bonds, treat them as a risky asset and manage it accordingly. And so here's a paper we published in the Financial Analyst Journal that shows how you could mix stocks and bonds intelligently. I don't know if it linked or not, but if not, yeah, Chris, I'll send it to you separately. Yeah.
If you want to see it,
yeah,
you're going to have to clip it because we can't save these on the video. Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so I'm totally in favor of more intelligent strategies. This is by no means the only one. I'm sure people will come up with better ideas than this, but that would be my bias, is create these instruments and then let the industry compete on what their best ideas are for combining, these instruments with other risky assets to give people whatever their target income is, right? So this is, in fact, the one comment I want to make is there's a distinction between focusing on instruments and focusing on products. And I think too much of the article, like even, Martin Wolf's comments, are too much on the product. I don't care about private equity. That's a product. And annuity is a product. Let's get back to giving me the right Lego pieces and then let the industry compete on their best ideas. So this was like a really starter version of a more intelligent glide path, but glide being income focused, not age only, right? So it's age and income and risk tolerance as well.
Well, I'm afraid we've come to 11:31, which is over time. We started a little bit late, we finished a little bit late. But I would like, on behalf of Steve, who's looking very glazy at me, because he had a stupid comment about cryptocurrency, which I didn't allow to be asked.
I say bonkers, my personal opinion. So there you go. Anyway.
Well, we'll do one on crypto in the not too distant. I don't want to start that all over again.
No, I know.
11:31. So we'll close it. We'll close this session. Thank you very much, Steve, for fixing it up. Brilliant.
No problem.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for being here. That's great. Thanks to all the people who've been on the call. You've been fab. Even if you didn't ask questions, I do hope you got a lot out of it. The video will be out hopefully tomorrow. Depends when we get the video done. And if you've got any questions, you know where to get me. So I'll be able to ask them of Aaron or put you in touch with whatever. And most importantly, we have a time of change going on with new government and whatever. So let's hope that Aaron gets his ideas circulated, and I'll make sure that the video gets in front of the people who I know you want it to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Steve, have you got anything to add?
No, just to say thanks everybody for joining. I hope you enjoyed today's session. The video will be up later on this afternoon. Aaron, fantastic as usual. And that we will keep talking, as they say. let's also pray for peace in the East and peace in the Middle East. And next week, for a lot of you CDC fans, we've got CDC Part 2. So CDC, join us next week, Aaron. You want to get up early if you're in Washington.
Yeah.
Join us early next week for CDC Part 2. But it should be good fun. Should be good.
I'm
fun.
being kicked out of this room, so you better go.
We got to
as
go.
well.
We got to go. All right. Enjoy,
Okay.
everybody.
Bye-bye. Cheers.
Enjoy. Bye. Bye.
Bye.